G'day guys, this is just a little quick one, just to cover riboflavin again and homocysteine, just to clarify a few points. Let me just share the screen. Okay, so basically what we've got here is riboflavin lowers homocysteine in individuals homozygous for MTHFR 677C with a T polymorphism, so, or TT. Now, what they did was they, in this actual preventative cardiology published study, they did a meta-analysis, the background predicted 25% lowering of plasma homocysteine would reduce the risk of coronary heart disease by 11% to 16% and strokes by 19 to 24%. Individual homozygous for the methylenitrahydrofolate reductase, which is what MTHFR stands for. It's a bit of a mouthful, as you can see. This is the main one, 677C. This is the main, where there's another one, which is sort of secondary, but this is the main one that actually is the key one that everybody makes a big fuss about and all that. Key thing is that most people out there will basically say, most naturopaths, most other people on the interwebs or whatever, the big thing is you've got to supplement with methylfolate, and that's how you basically improve the status. Reality is that's not really true. You know, this is why people that have got this problem end up, you know, with never really resolving this issue. You know, they try and pump more methylfolate in there, and just because you're adding more folate, it doesn't fix the problem, because folate has a tendency of burning away a lot of, B12. Okay, so you add folate, B12, and B6 to support those other two. And you may bring up your status slightly, but it can create certain imbalances. The thing is, this sort of change, genetic change, had a reason why it happened. It didn't happen accidentally. You know, it's a small proportion of the population. It tends to be more pronounced in populations that tended to consume more meat, because animal products tend to have higher, basically, riboflavin. Dairy in particular. You'll find this also more prevalent amongst populations that consume more dairy as well. You know, so it's not accidental. So what actually is happening is these people are basically utilizing riboflavin as a way of actually upregulating the enzyme that actually basically converts homocysteine back to methionine. You know, that basically reduces homocysteine in the bloodstream, which is a waste product, but you know, can be inflammatory. You know, while a lot of the studies, you know, there's an association out there about homocysteine, you know, it's not a simple cut and dry that, you know, that homocysteine basically is creating a whole lot of pathology, as far as I'm concerned. I believe that it's part of, you know, the overall inflammatory sort of state that a lot of people find themselves, because they tend to consume foods that are less inflammatory, have lower riboflavin. So is it the lack of riboflavin in their diet, or is it the other stuff that they're actually including in their diet that's actually having that effect in the first place? Sort of the chicken and egg sort of thing, which no real study has really pinpointed the actual causality in a sense. What is it the lack of one for this specific population, or is it the lack of the? I think it's it's a moot point. Like which I've spoken about in the past with the the Chinese Han Chinese and their choline, endogenous production of choline. That happened to that population because they were deprived over a number of generations with sufficient animal foods, and as a consequence of that, those who could adapt and change to basically endogenously produce something that they got from animal foods, where they could convert methionine from any source, from any other protein source, into choline, had greater reproductive success. And so that became the dominant gene. It's the same thing here. People that basically, the body basically, if you're giving it something that it can actually do something, why basically invest a whole lot of resources to, to transcript enzymes? I mean, every single function and biological process that happens in the body requires some sort of protein structure. So if you're basically forced to produce a whole lot of protein structures, that means you're neglecting other areas. If you're getting certain types of nutrients over a number of generations, the body's going to go, well, I don't need to basically, as much folate or as much B12, or as much of whatever, and it's sort of these populations are consuming more. They're getting enough B12 from the milk. They're getting enough folate from a number of other sort of sources. And they could have had a deprivation for a small period of time over a couple of generations. There could have been starvation conditions or whatever. Being if you look at it, it's particularly prone in mountainous areas. So limited food over a particular period of time of animal foods. And so I suspect that even small amounts of animal foods, because of very high in riboflavin, this mutation must have happened to basically be able to utilize the riboflavin as a way of actually upregulating this this enzyme, so it could actually do the job. As a simple, like the Han Chinese, where they're sort of, so it would have been a time of deprivation of these people, but they had sufficient animal foods in there, but not enough to basically support their requirements for B12 and folate, but sufficient, in semi-starvation sort of conditions over a prolonged period of time in certain mountainous regions. And so as a consequence, certain biological changes happen to allow them to be able to achieve, to utilize the riboflavin in order to basically get a stronger activation, because B2 in this whole process does play a role. It's sort of those two methylation pathways. You've got the choline betaine, and then you've got most people call it the B9, the folate B12, but it's a synergistic of primarily folate and B12 plus a secondary role of basically B6, and then a very minor role for most people of B2. But when you have this sort of genetic change, it's because basically you're not getting some of the others, but you're getting, because B6 is also very high in animal foods, like meat in particular. So if you're being deprived of some of these things, then riboflavin can play a big role, especially if you've got access to dairy but not a lot of meat. You're in mountainous regions, so you can actually get very high levels of riboflavin in dairy compared to meats. And so that dairy then can provide you that support. So you usually find this genetics in mostly Europeans, and to a large extent populations that have had a strong dairy connection and probably some deprivation periods. So this is why. It's not a big percentage of the population. It's, you know, mostly around the 10% or less, depending on which part of the, well, so it doesn't really affect the majority of the population. That's the reality. But there is a second, you know, the polymorphism where you've got one of the alleles, but that's a minor effect, especially in today's world where we've got so much plenty of food in terms of animal products and dairy and stuff like that availability. So those people are not affected at all. It's just that the people with the TT, you know, who are homozygous, you know, so they've got two TTs that are the affected alleles in that specific gene. And so those people are a small percentage of the population. They tend to require more riboflavin, like myself, you know. So if you consume more riboflavin, way above the RDI, you eliminate that whole problem. So let's just move down. So I'm not going to we won't go through all those details. This is the sort of some of the pathways. Now, look at this first one. So this part here, in a sense, I'll just have to bring across this study that makes sense. So change in EGRAC, so it's going down when you add riboflavin for all types, whether you're basically the normal type, CC, or you're homozygous, TT, which is what I am, or you've got a polymorphism where you've got one of the alleles, so you're CT. Okay, so for everyone, giving them basically good levels of riboflavin compared to those with a placebo, with everybody's there's a change in EGRAC. So let me explain what that is. That's another long one. So what that is basically erythrocyte glutathione reductase activation coefficient is an index of riboflavin deficiency. That's basically what it indicates. So when that goes down, when you give riboflavin and that goes down, you mean that those people become less deficient. Okay, so their status improves. So when this goes down, so just to cover that, basically red blood cells, just so people can understand that. Hemoglobin, so that's basically inside your red blood cells, which is basically that it's a metalloprotein. And so, well, everything's a fucking protein in the body. But anyway, it's called a metalloprotein because, you know, it binds iron and oxygen, you know, so in there. And basically now, obviously, when you've actually you know, having this effect, this sort of reduction sort of effect in a sense, because more exactly of FAD deficiency in man, as they call it anyway. So the average EGRAC value of 0.4 to 0.22, it was deducted that the average free fat levels were approximately 2 times lower in patients than the control group. So they also had this sort of, what is it called? It's a cytochrome B5 reductase cofactor, flavin something, I fucking can't remember it anyway, but that's unimportant. This sort of enzyme sort of maintains sort of your hemoglobin, the function in that regard. It's a sort of an very important sort of a enzyme related to glutathione that actually reduces in red blood cells oxidative damage, stuff like that. So, you know, people have this problem, genetic problem, you know, they may have more, it's a lot of factors. It's not just, you know, this requirement. They may have some more oxidative damage than the sort of general people, but let's not over exaggerate this, because there is a lot of other factors. It's associational in nature, and you know, and I'll explain why. Let me just take that out of the bloody way. I'll explain why, because even though we let me just, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. Okay. So, one second. Anyway, so here's the actual, these people, so as you can see, that part is the sort of enzymatic side of, you know, things functioning correctly in your red blood cells. So we've covered that part, okay? So we're getting a good response here. So everybody needs riboflavin. But on the homocysteine front as well, here we've got a massive reduction of the TTs. So these people who are homozygous, that's a really good top p-value as well. 0.007, pretty good. You know, the likelihood that that happened by chance is far more reduced. Where the people with the CT, it's, you know, potentially, you know, yes, we see a reduction, but the likelihood, it's not a strong p-value. And because of this sort of level, I would say, you know, it's statistical noise. We don't really know in that regard. We're seeing improvements here with all of them. So I suspect these ones are fine. There's somewhere, you know, there's not a big one. The big one is the major reduction when we're looking at homocysteine change, massive, you know. So this is the group that people are all concerned about in the naturopathic sort of industry, you know, pushing vitamins and folate and stuff like that. And we know folate is dangerous. Over prescribing it can deplete B12. Is not very good for the brain if you're depleting B12. So let's keep that in mind. Now let's just go down here. Now these are the homocysteine levels that we see, the sort of reductions, and in the group that is the key one that we're interested in. Okay, so we can actually see there is a massive reduction there, but still they're coming from 22 right down to 13. We know homocysteine levels should be below 7 or below. So these people are on a SAD diet, okay? These people are on a SAD diet, okay? So some of these other people down here, you know, so we're talking about around 11, you know, anywhere between 11 and 13 is on a SAD diet. That's what people are. Now, the only reason why these people are very high is because basically they have, you know, the other alleles. You know, they don't have the CC. They either have the polymorphism, or they have basically the one that I've got. And the one that I've got, they see the biggest response, and they have the worst levels of homocysteine, as you can see. So that's your polymorphism, that group, and this is the other group. So most vegetarians are usually in the 17 to 19, and most vegans, in all studies that I've actually seen, are usually over 20 up to as high as close to 30. So somebody can be on a SAD diet, and because they not getting enough riboflavin, they could be potentially as high as a vegan in terms of homocysteine. Even though they're getting plenty of B12 and folate in, they could be as bad as a vegan because of this genetic issue. Let alone if they were, you know, a vegan, God, who knows how high they would be. I haven't seen a study where they're actually looking at people, because it's an average, but specifically just looking at people with this genetics and doing a vegan diet, I haven't seen. I wouldn't want to see. I'd be horrified where their homocysteine levels would be. So that's just to clarify a few things, because I've talked about homocysteine and these genetics. But at the end, everybody basically gets an improvement. Here we know it's between the groups, it's statistical noise. So, and that's sort of where these are the placebo type. So that's just baseline placebo. We're not seeing much, much change. So we're not really interested in that sort of stuff. We're really interested in the people that have got this issue, and we can see a pretty good p-value as well. So the likelihood that this reduction in homocysteine was at chance, unlikely. And it's quite a bit, if we take a look, it's nearly 13, that's 22, it's a significant amount that we're actually noticing here. So that's 11. If you get that sort of reduction, if you were basically, let's say, at around a normal omnivore level of around 13 or that, a reduction of that sort would basically push you into very low homocysteine levels. It's not going to happen, but you know what I mean. That is a massive order of reduction. So you can actually see that just eating more animal foods, which are much higher in riboflavin, fixes the problem. It's simple. There is no MTHFR problem if you're on a species-appropriate diet. It's only when you're not on a species-appropriate diet is it a real problem. So, but unfortunately, as I said, the naturopathic doctors is just as bad. Most of them are vegetarian anyway, are just as bad as the MDs in pushing pills and, rather than actually, and in particular, the wrong type of pill. I mean, if they were offering these people, a cheap riboflavin, B2 vitamin, that'd be something. No, the idiots are offering them basically, folate in a very highly bioavailable form, which means that it will tax your B12. And most of these people are going to be on plant-based stuff and all that, if they're going to a naturopath, because that's the sort of advice they'll get from most of them, which means that they will be struggling to get sufficient B12. So they'll be taxing their B12 status as well. So, yeah, that is why you hear all these horror stories about this particular type of homozygous type allele, and people make a big freaking fuss within the general community and within the vegetarian community and all those other communities. But when you look at in particular the carnivore community, you don't hear about it. And the reason why you don't hear about it is because the diet is sufficient to resolve the problem. That is why people have much lower homocysteine levels on a carnivore diet, because they're getting more than enough riboflavin to sort that out, let alone they're getting choline to support the other pathway. It's basically a non-issue for us in that regard. And most people have the capacity to convert choline, which they get more than enough from eggs in particular, organ meats, and even in some of the general meats, you'll get some choline. And if you don't have enough in terms of folate, you'll convert it. Yes, I'm one of those unlucky people that do have that genetic problem where I can't convert methionine to choline and then to folate, but most people do. It's a very small minority of people that don't have that capacity. I'm one of the unfortunates, but a lot of other people do, the majority of people. So usually that whole pathway is a non-issue for the majority of people doing a more low-carb, a more animal-based diet. As long as it's more animal-based and they're getting more than enough of riboflavin, not an issue, We need to stop medicating folate. It's not good. And we need to stop basically creating a whole lot of, a whole industry of BS, basically, where people are basically have money siphoned out of their pockets for a problem that doesn't exist if you're on a species appropriate diet. Simple as that. Anyway, I just wanted to have a little quick rant on the importance of riboflavin in animal products in particular, and if we sort of look at the actual, the type of sources, it's important that we basically look at these sort of foods, and when we basically look at them, seeing is believing. Beef, that's only that amount to getting 66% of your daily requirements. That is 3.5 ounces. I tell you, 3.5 ounces aren't going to fill me up. I'm going to be starving if that's all I bloody eat. So more than likely I'll get 3 times that at a minimum, which basically means that, I'm getting 200% nearly. And that I haven't even, that's just one steak, okay, for most of us, which would be basically, a good steak in that regard. Milk, pretty good as well. There's low fat, which tends to be much lower in that regard. Usually in raw milk, you'll get basically, and full fat cream milk, you will get much more. And like the raw milk that I get within a 16-ounce glass, this one you only get 69%. In a 16-ounce glass of raw milk, you get about I think it's just a tad below, it's 96% from memory. I think it's about 96%. So practically 100%. So one glass of milk and a big steak, I got 300%. I got 3 times my requirement. I think 1 time is fine. 2 times is definitely going to upregulate that pathway. Not a problem, because that was 1.6, which is what they were having. So what is the requirement? The daily requirement is 1.3. So if I'm getting 3 times that, which is 1.3, and that's just from those 2, which I have every day, let alone I'm not even covering the rest. So that times 3 divided by 1.6 is what they did on that trial, if you remember. That's about nearly 2.5 times of what they did to fix up their status. So I don't think I'm going to have a problem, And, tofu is basically fortified. So, and I have no idea about the bioavailability. I couldn't tell you. Salmon's pretty good source as well. For those who are keto, low carb type people, mushrooms are pretty good source as well. Pork is pretty good as well. Spinach, I believe, is as well. Almonds, for those who are in the keto type community, avocados and that sort of part of the community. Not that I would eat these high oxalate foods. I'd give them a miss personally. But, eggs, 4 eggs, you've got 80%, which is what I usually consume anyway for my choline requirements, unless I get sick and tired. Today I only had 2, but I took about 3 grams of choline anyway, so don't care. Plenty of choline to export fat out of the liver, so unconcerned in that regard. So And if you pretty much look, it's just dominated by animal, oops, not that one, 2, 4, 5. So, and the most dominant up here is obviously beefsteak. So, yes. So in that regard, I would say to people, if you're on an animal-based diet, you're not going to have a problem whatsoever if you've got that. And even if you're doing low carb, and even, I mean, somebody who may be doing, is plant-based and all that, I mean, they should be looking at these sort of, in particular, things like mushrooms and avocados. If they're, because those two are going to have slightly less anti-nutrients compared to that and that and that, to the almonds, the spinach, and the tofu. And that's fortified, as we said, the tofu. It's not really in tofu. It's a soy product. It doesn't have it. They've just fortified it. And not all tofu is fortified with riboflavin. So I don't even know why it's, in this list anyway. But that's one product. So, just because you're a plant-based and you're getting tofu, it doesn't mean you're necessarily getting riboflavin. It depends on the brand. So that's a hit and miss. So really, we could just ignore that. And really the only plant-based ones then are really these 4 here. So pretty much. And I would give those 2 a miss because of a lot of the anti-nutrients in them. And the only 2 would be mushrooms. And mushrooms are not sort of, technically, they're not an animal food, or they're a fungus. They're somewhere in between. They sort of coexist on anything. They're sort of somewhere halfway between a plant and an animal, in a sense, the way they are. So I sort of see mushrooms, their structure, their internal structure in many regards is closer to that of an animal than to a plant. So, I sort of, even though some people would disagree with me, a fungus is more animal-like than plant-like. Simple as that. Plants have got, sort of a very different structures, and their fibrous structures and stuff like that. Something that you don't find in animal foods. So probably out of the real animal foods, these 3 here, I would say probably the avocado would be the least problematic for people who are on more plant-based type things. But even there, you really have to consume quite a bit of avocado, in that regard. So by combining mushrooms with avocados and doing a bit more of that sort, like 2 cups, you'll probably get, so 38 times 2 plus 20. Yeah, you've nearly got about, you may get a bit from the others as well, other stuff. So 2, you pretty much can cover that requirement. But then again, you can just buy yourself a B2 vitamin, since most plant-based people, live off vitamins, supplements, so to speak. That is probably your best option in that regard. Anyway, we'll stop there. Back to me. I had a bit of fun just going over the riboflavin thing that I've never really touched in a deep. I've discussed it before, but just showing quite clearly the importance of it in dealing with this. Pretty much the concept that there is a homocysteine MTHFR issue is really just a beat up by the naturopaths, especially the plant-based naturopaths, because it's that community that has the highest homocysteine levels. So, people that are on more animal-based diets don't have to worry. The reality is the reasons why the other high levels of homocysteine that exist in that study, that even the people that came down didn't come down below the sort of those lower levels, is because basically these are SAD dieters, and SAD dieters usually are around above 10 and just below 13 in terms of, it's only when you're doing keto diets, low carb diets, carnivore diets, that you tend to actually go sub 7 to much lower levels. And the more you reduce plant-based products, the lower your homocysteine levels go. And the more you include animal-based products, the higher it go. The better improvements in those functions happen. So hope you enjoyed it. That's it. See yous.